So I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but for the first Politicon, we had about as many people are in this room with a couple of weeks to go. We ended up having a couple thousand people that first year. We've got about 10,000 people this year. So thank you for making this into a big success. Let me put it this way, in our first year we weren't getting Lesley Stahl. So thanks very much. Kamy Akhavan is our moderator too from procon.org. Kamy, just first, before you start, just tell the group what that is.
Thanks, Matt. So Procon.org is a research organization. We look at the pros and the cons of controversial issues. It is a public charity that exists to provide the public service of giving folks an honest-to-goodness, neutral source of information on controversial issues ranging from gun control and same-sex marriage to Obamacare to teacher tenure, standardized testing, on, 50-plus different issues. We serve an audience of about 28 million people annually, and the website is completely free of charge. So we're here in a neutral, actively neutral capacity today.
So thank you, and you're going to moderate the panel and introduce all the panelists. Good luck, and thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, folks, so first of all, welcome. Welcome to our panelists, and welcome to those of you in the audience today. I live here in Los Angeles, and I think it's frankly quite weird that we have this many people from DC, New York City that are here in our city talking about politics. We're not used to this, and I was wondering, why, Politicon, why did you pick Los Angeles? And then I thought, and I'm guessing, we in Los Angeles are very good at a few things. One of them is we're awfully good at raising money, and we're awfully good at telling stories. And isn't that what politics is all about today anyways? So I thought, okay, that makes perfect sense. So the organization that I'm here representing, Procon.org, we look at pros and cons. And the nature of our panel discussion here today is to look at an issue that I think affects all of us down to the roots of what's happening in our country. And we want to get to the bottom of that, understand how these political views are formed and how they're changed and why our country is in the state that it's in right now. And I just wanted to share one quick story before I introduce our panelists, and that is, about a year ago, I was invited to National Public Radio. They had a fundraiser in Santa Monica, and I got a chance to meet, if you listen to LA Radio, KCRW's the great Warren Olney, and one of the great NPR reporters. They were both there. And I said, hey, NPR reporters, how do you guys get people to talk about issues in a way that's civil, where they shed light on issues without adding heat to the issues, and you really understand both sides? And they said, both of them, that we never have people with opposing views on at the same time. Whoa, okay, well, we're going to do something a little bit different here today. We have people representing a diverse spectrum of ideology here on our stage, and we're going to show that it's okay to disagree without being disagreeable, because that's what we want to model for our nation. Our talk today, folks, just so you know, it's being streamed on Facebook Live. It's also being video recorded, and it's going to be podcasted. We have professional photographers here, so we want the whole world to see what it is that we're doing in this room today, because we think that's really important for our country. So with that, it brings me great joy to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to go from the end down closest to me, and starting with Mr. John Phillips. So John is also a Los Angelino, right? At least currently so. And he is someone you may have seen on CNN. He's on CNN a lot. And he is also an opinion writer for the Orange County Register. John has a great political profile, great political brand, and a great political mind. And we're very happy to have him here today. Among other things, John has also been a known Trump supporter. And I wanted to ask you, John, because you live here in Los Angeles, and this is not exactly Trump country, I wonder, whenever people ask you about Trump, are they looking to understand your views, or are they looking to argue with you?
First of all, I want to apologize if I'm squinting, because with this light in my eye, I feel like I'm being interrogated for kidnapping a Holmberg baby. They kind of look at me like they're anthropologists looking at a monkey, in certain respects. Trump didn't do very well here in California. We're in the distinct minority, but that's okay. I'm a Republican that lives in California. That in and of itself is something that kind of puts you in a protected class. But you learn to live with it. You learn to deal with it. Most people are friendly. Most people don't hold your politics against you. And I'm used to surrounding myself with people who have a diversity of opinions, a diversity of backgrounds. You know, when you live in Los Angeles your entire life, all of your friends are Jews, gays, and Scientologists. So I'm used to everyone from every background, so it's not that big of a deal for me.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, John Phillips. Next, I'd like to introduce someone I'm very excited to, was very excited to meet today. This person is someone who worked on the Newt Gingrich campaign. He's been a frequent writer to places like BuzzFeed and CNBC, Daily Dot. He's a staff writer for The Hill. He's also been on CNN many, many times. And of all of your amazing accomplishments at such a young age, Shermichael, the thing that perhaps struck me the most, and may strike you the most, is you had one of the most famous firings in American history. The firer-in-chief, Donald Trump himself, fired you from your position as the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where I know you were very close with Dr. Ben Carson, and he famously fired you. And I wondered, Michael, do you think they made the right call?
I mean, for me, I think it was the right call. No, I think, you know, when I wrote the column last year about Donald Trump, where I essentially talked about many of the problems that I saw in him as a candidate, whether that was morally, ethically, and some of the things that I think that we as a country should expect out of a leader, me getting fired, to me, was everything that I wrote came true. So all of my views, all of my concerns about his lack of discernment, his unpredictability, his inability to take critiques, even if those critiques are going to make him better as a leader, he lacked. And I think if you are going to lead, particularly a nation, you have to be open to criticism. Because how else can you grow? You have to be open to differing views, because you don't just represent the people who voted for you. You don't just represent 1/3 of the country. You don't represent red states or blue states. You represent the United States. And I think it is the expectation for us as people to expect out of our leaders that they live up to the rules, up to the traditions, up to the norms that we place above our leaders' heads. I think most people, by and large, would admit that there are a lot of things, expectations out of leaders that we probably don't expect out of ourselves. And that's why leadership is such a special thing, because not everyone is capable of doing it. There's a crown that we place above our leaders' heads, and with that crown comes so many responsibilities. And at that time, I did not think Donald Trump could live up to those responsibilities, and I think if we look today, I was probably right.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Shermichael Singleton. Thank you very much, Shermichael. Now, folks, the next person I want to introduce, not only am I super excited to do it, my parents now have a higher esteem for me because I'm doing this. And folks, this person, you obviously know her from 60 Minutes. She's been perhaps the most recognized investigative journalist in our country today. She has done so many incredible things throughout her career. You know, you got the first interview with Donald Trump after he got elected. You've been in Guantanamo Bay interviewing people who were held captive there. You've interviewed Boris Yeltsin and Yasser Arafat, and you're the person who broke that Al Gore wasn't going to run again. You broke so many important news stories. You are really a national treasure, Lesley, and it is my great privilege to introduce you. And I have...
Just imagine if someone said to you, what's going on?
Well, you know, of the many incredible things you do, and we could have a whole hour just about that, but one of the things that I really wanted to mention is that you wrote this fabulous book. It's called Becoming Grandma, The Joys and Science of New Grandparents.
On sale right now.
On sale right now. It is in the bookstore here, and it is a bestseller, and for a very good reason. It's terrific. Now, in that book, Lesley, you talked about this overwhelming, joyous emotion that sprang from you whenever you became a grandmother, and then you also talked about the scientific side of that, how it's really just oxytocin that was flooding your brain, and I liked how you talked about the emotional side and the brain side of things. And my question for you is, have you ever had that joyous oxytocin reaction in your life as a reporter?
You're comparing my life as a reporter to holding my grandchildren? It's an interesting question, because you read about, well, you think that you're unique when you hold a baby, whether it's your own child or your grandchild. You think it's only you that's having this, and then you find out, no, it's all coming from brain chemistry. And the same thing is true in politics. I love my job, so I get very excited when I get to be a reporter and do these interviews, so something is happening within me. But we do think that we're unique, that we living something that just because Donald Trump is president is afoot.
Thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, Lesley Stahl. And with that, I'd like to introduce the last of our very esteemed panelists here, and that is Amie Parnes. Now, Amie is a senior White House correspondent for the Hill publication. She has covered presidential candidates from her time at Politico to her time at the Hill. She got to cover Barack Obama for both of his terms, and in the process, she was so good at this type of presidential political reporting that you were given really access to the kingdom of Hillary Clinton, and were able to track her campaign, which you famously did in 2 books. One of them was the #1 New York Times bestseller. Wow, that was the book Shattered. It's incredible. If folks haven't read Shattered, it is a must-read whether you like Hillary or dislike her. It is an honest look at what happened in that campaign. Terrific. And so, Amie, you've obviously had a terrific career as a journalist, and my question for you is, when you were writing the book Shattered, you were able to have this incredible access because you did not expose the names of your sources. But we're at Politicon, and my question for you is, are any of those sources here, and what is that perception like for you?
They're possibly here. They might be wandering around outside. I think one of the reasons why the book was so successful is because we didn't just talk to people on the outside perimeter, we talked to people inside the campaign. And this was their story, for good and bad. And I think a lot of people at the time talked to us because they believed that she would win, and they wanted their fingerprints on history. And a funny story, about a month before we turned in our book, we had been writing it all along because our book was due 2 months after the election, which would have been impossible to turn around. And so we turned in parts of the book to our editor at Crown, and our editor came back to us and said, "Hey, can we all get on a call today?" And so my co-author and I were kind of like, "Okay, what does this mean?" So we get on a conference call, and he says to us, "So you guys have a problem here. You're talking about a doomed campaign, and she's going to win. And how do you square that?" And there was a silence on the phone for probably a good minute or 2. and then I jokingly said, "We'll figure it out." But I think the key to this book was we followed our reporting, and it was true shoe leather reporting. And that's why I think a lot of people took to it. And when you have people from Spike Lee to Rush Limbaugh recommending the book, I think you've done something right.
All right, well done, ladies and gentlemen, Amie Parnes. So the format of what we're going to do today is, because we represent quite a broad range of ideological perspectives here, I wanted at first to just demonstrate what listening feels like and sounds like. And so I've asked each of the panelists here to really just own the soapbox for about a minute or 2. And in that minute or 2, I've asked them to talk about why our politics are so divided today. Why is it that we can't disagree with each other, maybe even take a few swings, but then we go and have a beer afterwards? Why can't we do that anymore? Why is Thanksgiving dinner getting increasingly awkward year after year? Nobody really seems to want that, and yet that seems to be what's happening. So there's a lot of reasons to this. I'm being a little bit flippant about it, but there's deep reasons for this, and I was hoping we could kind of get to the bottom of this, these political beliefs and where they form and what it takes to change them. And so with that, I'll ask John, if you can, to just start us off on your 1 to 2 minute soapbox about whatever you want to say on this subject, and then from that point on, we'll have guided questions and continue our conversation.
Well, I'm sure I'm in the minority on this, but I don't think Trump has much to do with it. I think that most of us live in our own little bubbles, and there's a whole body of research in political science. It's called critical realignment theory. And the theory is that back in the day, you used to have liberals and conservatives in both political parties. You had Nelson Rockefeller in the same party as Barry Goldwater. You had Scoop Jackson in the same Democratic Party as George McGovern. And everything just kind of worked out that way because you had liberal Republicans who would work with liberal Democrats, and you'd have bipartisan consensus, or conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans. And then in '64, when Barry Goldwater was nominated, everything really kind of started to change, where at the presidential level, conservatives started voting for the Republican candidate, and liberals started voting for the Democratic candidate. In 1994, you had another realignment election, where people started voting that way in elections for Congress, because before they vote for whoever it was that matched their ideology for president, but if they were a Democrat, they still voted for the Democrat for Congress. Well, in '94, that all changed. In 2010, we realigned again, this time for state and local elections. And because of our phones, because of the internet, because of technology, the definition of what is local has totally changed. And what we forget in politics and political science, when we think about voter behavior or how people express whatever ideology they have or feelings that they have, we only think about what they do in terms of the ballot box. But the reality is that most people, when they change their mind, when they have, they go on a different path, they vote with their feet. They don't vote at the ballot box. So if you live in a city where the schools are crappy, you don't try to influence the school board election. You just leave. You go to a city where there's a better school district. If crime in your city is awful, you move to a different city. And that's how most people respond to these things. And therefore, you end up living around a bunch of people who think exactly like you. You end up friends with people on Facebook who think exactly like you. And you end up in a political party with a bunch of people who think exactly like you. And so therefore, we have two Americas.
That answers my question. Thank you for that, John. Shermichael, same for you. It's your soapbox. How'd we get here?
I think when you think about ideologies, which is essentially our values and our belief systems, how we formulate our opinions politically based upon, again, our environments, which is very accurate, but also our experiences. I think what's most interesting about this is when you have people who look at someone who may be a Democrat or look at someone who's a Republican and say, wow, they're traveling on a road that's so far removed from the road that I'm traveling on that I can't communicate with them. They don't understand my position. They don't understand the issues that are of importance to me. So I'm not even going to take the opportunity to bother making the steps or the effort to speak to this person, to ponder, reflect if we can reach some type of middle road. Now, granted, we've gone through this throughout the history of our country, but I think for me what's most interesting about this time is how polarized everyone really is, whether it's because of race, whether it's because of sexual orientation, whether it's because of various other wedged issues. And I think a lot of people are looking around for leaders, regardless if they're Republicans or Democrats, to say, how do we get to this place and how do you guys guide us out? We look to our leaders for guidance. And I think right now, for a lot of people, they feel there is no one who's speaking to them. Who's speaking for me? Who's speaking for my neighbor? Who's speaking for the person who lives in a different state? And a lot of people feel like there's no one. And so I think the hope is, the expectation is, that our leaders at some point have the realization that we are better if we are united than we are divided. There's only 300 million people in America. You look at China, India, it's over 1 billion. Quantify that, we have a lot to compete against. There is no way we can work if we're divided. It just doesn't work. But if we look at the history of our country, it tells us that we have gone through so many things, from slavery to segregation to the feminist movement and other movements throughout history, and we've overcome those things. So the hope for you guys, the hope for me at least, is that I know we can overcome this moment too, because as Lesley said, we've gone through these things before.
Interesting. Thank you, Shermichael, for that. And with that, I also love to get your thoughts on this. How do you get here?
Well, I agree with both of you, except you left out gerrymandering, John. I want to talk about something close to my heart, and that is that it's the umbrella topic is technology. And over the millennia, technology has always been the force that changes humanity, changes the direction humanity takes. So when I at least was growing up, television was the major force for communicating and for imparting information. And in those days, with just 3 or 4 networks, it was a unifying medium. Everybody watched the same news at the same time. Everybody listened to the same jokes at night. Everybody heard the same ads. We began to look more alike. We began to sound more alike. And we really did come together as a country in so many ways. And then we got cable. And cable began to break that down. 24-hour cycle, all of that, but also you could watch whatever you wanted. So if the president would speak, and in the 1960s, 70s, and even 80s, the whole country watched the president. So now you get cable, and some people are watching tractor porn. And they're, you know, and somebody's cooking. And the audience began to get smaller and more fragmented. And now we have the internet. And it is just splitting us up every which way. And it's also making us narrow-minded. It's a narrow broadcasting. We call it broadcast, it's called narrowcasting. And it is just dividing us into many different factors. So technology is a force. And what can overcome technology? Well, very little. It's a wave. There are two things. One is a really powerful leader who says we're going to be united and we want to follow him. We haven't had that in a long time. And the second is war. So there you go. Technology, savior, war.
Interesting. Thank you, Lesley. The same question to you, Amie. How did we get here?
Well, I have to echo a lot of what Lesley said, because I feel that as a journalist, every single day, people think that in this day and age, all journalists have opinions and bias. And you know, I trained in journalism school where, you know, you are objective, you don't take a side. I don't vote actually for that reason, because I was covering the Obama campaign and I was covering the campaign and I didn't want to choose a side. You know, I think it's everyone's right to, but I think my public service was sort of like what I do for the country. Get out there, and when I get nasty emails from people who accuse me of being a Trump lover or a Clinton lover or an Obama lover, I can say, you know what, you guys, I don't vote. I put it all out there, I let you decide. And I think, to Lesley's point, I think we are we're tuned into what we want to listen to and what we want to, you know, we don't want to, I have a friend who actually got off social media, wouldn't watch TV after the election, even got rid of her iPhone and went to a regular flip phone because she was like, I can't deal with it anymore. And I think we've come to this point as a nation where we're trying to figure out how we got here. And I think also we need a leader who can guide us through these times.
Interesting. I mean, such great perspectives, and I really appreciate your insight. So, Lesley, you brought up a point that's going to be my first question here, and I'm going to direct it, if I can, to John here at the end, because John, you work for one of the cable news companies, one of the institutions that Lesley, I think, smartly pointed to as a part of narrow broadcasting versus actual broadcasting. And so my question for you is that, you know, television has been the primary source of our political information, and it still is for most Americans. But the primary source of information is becoming the internet for many people, and for younger generations disproportionately so. And without the ABC, CBS, NBC, those unifiers where everybody got similar messages, similar times, from similar voices, and this splintering through the cable news network systems, I wonder, how do you think it's affecting our civic culture?
Well, I think that people are looking for confirmation bias. Everyone wants to watch television to see some guy in a suit say exactly what they believe, or people want to read a newspaper that prints articles that confirm every single one of their biases, or can confirm what they already thought about the subject. It reminds me of this episode of Seinfeld, when Kramer was trying to put a will together because he thought he might be dying. And so he I guess, decided what he wanted to do and typed it up, and he presented it to Jerry, and he said, "Here's my will." And Jerry said, Well, did you go to an attorney, a probate attorney, to make sure this was done correctly? And he said, no. And he said, did you do anything to make sure that this will hold up in court? And he said, no. And he said, well, what are you giving to, what makes you think that anyone will believe this? He said, it's typed. And I think that people feel like they're validated when they see what they believe in print, when they see what they believe on television, and so people seek it out. And then you're friends with people who think like you, so you see those links on your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed, and it just reinforces everything that you already came to the party with.
I see. Well, it's a great perspective, and you talk about it in the context of cable news, and I definitely want to get to social media. But continuing on the cable news line of thought here, Shermichael, similar question for you. You work for CNN. Do you find that cable news and not just the creation of, but the intense popularity of cable news now, where MSNBC, I think, was passing the networks in its top ratings, and Fox had been for years and for political coverage. And I just wonder if you think it's part of the problem, or is it part of the solution, that we needed more diversity in our media?
I certainly think we need more diversity, because I think it's accurate to say that people will look and seek validation in what they believe. Everyone wants to know if what I think is it true, is it real, can it be validated by someone that I respect? And I don't necessarily think there is an issue with that. I think the issue becomes when people that we see on cable news, whether it's myself as a commentator or a host of shows, are saying, well, not only am I going to validate you, but this is the only way. So whatever truth that I am telling you, that's it. And anything else that may be antithetical to that, don't listen to it. I think news has a responsibility to be as objective as possible. That is the number, at least in my view. And again, that goes back to the problem, the root of the problem. What is the expectation that we have out of journalists? And I think journalists such as yourself understand expectations. And you give the facts and you say, I'm going to interview someone the best of my ability, and I'll allow the people who will watch this interview to formulate their own opinion. And I think that's the expectation we should have by and large.
But a lot of them aren't news anchors. I think they're talk show hosts.
That's a good point.
And here's something that drives me crazy, and I'm sure every one of us are going to be driven crazy by this. At some point, the press, that word went away, and media is now the word. And everybody is in media. Everybody, Rush Limbaugh's media. You name anybody on television and they're in media, and so are you, and so am I. 60 Minutes correspondents who have had our opinions surgically removed. We are so objective, they just, they've been zapped out. And we're media, so we're all one thing to the public. So that drives me out of my mind. But when I was listening to what you were saying, I was thinking about who is listening to these shows in terms of numbers. And the evening news broadcasts, which really do try to be as objective as possible, have a much larger number of people tuning in than any of these cable outfits or anything on the internet, maybe except for the president's Twitter, I don't know. But aside from that, so I'm not 100% sure how the vast majority of people in the country are getting their news. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, there's a huge number watching Fox, but there's also a huge number watching CNN, and there's an even larger number just watching standard, good old evening news kind of news. So there's something, I don't know, something that we're just getting out of the air. Can I tell a story that happened to me in the campaign? Let me go back a step and say that of all people, Alan Greenspan gave me the most brilliant political lesson that I've ever heard. And that is that a really, really brilliant, the definition of a really brilliant, genius politician is that he catches the wave of public opinion like a surfer in just the right time, before any other politicians, but after it's really bubbling in the public. So with that in mind, I want to tell you about a focus group that I sat in on early on in the primaries. This was a Republican focus group. Trump was not even asked about. He was so out nowhere yet. He wasn't on the scene every single candidate was asked about, from top to bottom, except Trump. And these people, well, their first choice was Scott Walker, and their second choice, was Marco Rubio, and then it went down. And Newt was way down, and Chris Christie was way down, okay? Then we went down to the basement from Chris Christie. It was a huge sort of fall, because hatred and fury and resentment and oozing dislike came in for Jeb Bush. Now, the media all thought Jeb Bush was going to get the nomination at that point. In the press, he was the guy. He was inevitable. This group of Republicans hated him with such an intensity. And that intensity is Trump. The language they used to describe Jeb Bush, elitist, who does he think he is? I mean, Trump just got on that wave that those people in that group, when they were venting about Jeb Bush, is exactly what Trump ended up doing. So it wasn't that he led us there, it's that he caught the wave at just the right time.
And I think the Democratic Party kind of dropped it.
They didn't catch the wave, they didn't understand it.
No, not at all. And you're hearing people now, and I've heard from a lot of these people on the heels of our book, who say, you know, where was she? Why wasn't she talking to me? You've heard Joe Biden now say as much. You've heard Chuck Schumer, the senator from New York, say as much. That they neglected to speak to that guy who's making $60,000 a year and his wife who's a waitress. And I think that's why the Democratic Party right now is in its rebuilding, rethinking phase, where it's lost its core audience. It doesn't know. I mean, when you've lost minority groups, when millennials of color, Cornell Belcher did this study recently talking about how millennials of color were so upset and they just didn't even, they either voted for a third party or didn't turn out. These were people who voted for Obama in large waves, and for whatever reason, Hillary Clinton just forgot about them or wasn't speaking to them. And a couple of them were so angry, it evoked such a visceral reaction to them that they were like, you know, F the Democratic Party. Like, they're not for me. If I'm going to take my vote elsewhere, if they're not going to stand up for me. Millennial women, a group that I myself was personally interested in, they also said, I'm not going to vote, I don't have a connection to Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to vote for her. Which I still think is one of the most underreported stories of the entire campaign. How this group of women just couldn't connect to her and thought that one day maybe they would see another woman president and they would like her more and they would want to vote for her. But all these groups were kind of lost, I think, in this past election cycle. And I think both parties are kind of in kind of a bit of an identity crisis right now, where they're both kind of thinking, how do we kind of rebuild and reconnect with our voters?
Well, I do appreciate all of those points, and since we're shifting a little bit to talk from what started as media as our source of political information, and now we're talking about its application and how it translates into elections. So on that point, I want to start this question directed to you, Amie, which is a phenomenon that I still can't wrap my head around, which is about, we have 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, it's 535 seats, and how many of them do political scientists and election specialists consider competitive seats, where you can't, with pretty solid odds, guess who's going to win the race, which party's going to take that seat? And, you know, I thought half of these are competitive seats, maybe a third if I'm being cynical, but the reality is about 5% of these seats are considered competitive. Thinking 5%, that's nothing. All of our democracy is to determine 5% of the makeup of our elected legislative bodies. That didn't make sense to me. So I'm trying to jive that in my head, and I need your help here, folks. How is it that we have 5% competitive seats in our legislature at the federal level, and the congressional approval ratings are way down there, like maybe at or below used car salesmen, somewhere around 15% approval ratings. And I'm wondering, how can you jive these two concepts? Is it gerrymandering, like you said? Is it self-sortation, like you talked about? Is it voting patterns? Is it something else? Like, how do you explain that gap?
Fascinating question. I think everyone's still trying to figure it out. But, you know, I think there's an old saying that everyone likes their congresswoman or man. You know, and it's always someone else who's not serving them. So I think that's a big part of it. But I think it's true. It's funny. I've been doing a couple stories recently where I've been looking at districts that are competitive. And right now, the Democrats are they think the way to get the House back is to go through, and the Senate is to go through California, oddly enough, where we are right now, because there's seats that are competitive, like Darrell Iss's seat. So they're eyeing these seats and saying, okay, this is our way back if we win this. And what they're doing is they're looking at the places that actually voted for Hillary Clinton and voted for a Republican member of Congress, which is really interesting. So they're saying, okay, if these people they're persuadable if they can vote for Hillary Clinton and also be a Republican. And that's a fascinating storyline to me, and I think that's one that there was a super PAC here starting in California that's just focused on that specifically, on starting here. So yeah, it's something to watch for sure.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. Lesley, can you help shed some light on this, the gap between the 5% competitive seats and the 15% approval ratings?
Well, I suppose it's gerrymandering, I'm guessing. And I think the only way the Democrats are going to take the House and the Senate back is if it's a wave election. We've had it in the past, and I think that is a possibility this time. The campaign has to be nationalized. And the Democrats have to come up with a face. They have to come up with a leader people actually like, and not just someone who appeals to them on paper. Because I do think political decisions are made in our gut. I don't think they're made up here. I think they're made emotionally. And I also think they're made visually. I've done a lot of studying of how people get information on television. And I believe that the eye sees things, and then whatever is happening through the eyes goes down to your stomach. Now, there's a brain in your stomach, and the brain is where our judgments come. None of this is intellectual. None goes to the frontal lobes. You don't think it through. You see something, and you like it. Hear something, not the words, just the sense, the tone, and you like it or you hate it. So the Democrats need to give a face. They need a face. They need somebody appealing. And the Democrats have to try and make it a national wave election. Because if they leave it to the local issues, then the gerrymander is going to kick in. That's what I think.
It's Republicans too that need a face.
They have a face right now.
Unfortunately.
Shermichael, John, do you have any thoughts about
I certainly think gerrymandering is a big issue, particularly as an African American. You look at North Carolina, a recent case that went to the Supreme Court, where they said Republicans were so precise in gerrymandering, they were pretty much putting African Americans in certain districts because they believed African Americans were a threat to the ability of Republicans to get elected. That's absurd to me. I'm a Republican. Texas, and there are several other states. I'm a Republican who happens to be African American. If you look at demographic trends, where the country's going, we are going to be in big trouble in the future if we continue on this path. This country is becoming more diverse. That is the reality. There's nothing you can do about that. So why further isolate yourself and create further problems for the future of the party by saying, yeah, we don't want those people, so we'll just draw districts however we want, just so that our guy can win. If a candidate is a good enough candidate, I'm almost certain, regardless of party affiliation, most people will say, okay, this guy cares about making sure I have a good job, I have a safe community, I can provide for my family, Republican or Democrat, I'll vote for that person. Stand on the principles, stand on your policies. People will vote for that. I don't think you have to isolate people to win elections. Because by doing that, I think the Republican Party is putting itself in a really precarious predicament where maybe 5 or 10 years from now, we're looking at a more Browning America, and we're trying to figure out, well, how the heck do we win that? Because gerrymandering, I think, will only work so much when you look at states such as Virginia that's now purple. Georgia now, I have a lot of friends that are political operatives in Georgia, done races for 30 years. 5 years, Georgia could have a Democrat as governor. Texas, 10 or 15 years, Texas could have a Democrat as governor. What does that mean for the Republican Party of the future? Not the Republican Party today, but the Republican Party of the future. So I most certainly think gerrymandering is a big issue and a big deal and detrimental to the party in the long run.
I think it's two issues. One is that incumbents almost always win re-election, and there's no term limits on Congress. So just reflexively, people vote for the incumbent. The second issue is that Democrats gerrymander differently than Republicans. Republicans just want to win the seat. Democrats want to make sure we have an Asian district over here, we have a black district over here, we have a Latino district over here. And when you do that and you try to cut it up in certain ways, just not necessarily for your partisan advantage, you're going to end up with a lot of seats that you win 80-20, and we're going to end up with a lot of seats that we win 55-45. If the objective is just to win the seat, then you're going to win more seats than if the objective is to pick who the winning candidate is going to be.
Maybe I'm too much of an idealist here, but I think if I'm a Republican and let's say I decide to go back to Atlanta where I went to college, which is a very democratic city, and I want to run for Congress, I believe if my positions are sound enough, if most people feel this guy actually cares, regardless of where I am in life, regardless of what my beliefs are, he will do the best he can to represent me, they will vote for you. I truly believe that. And I think it's so unfortunate when you have members of Congress and politicians that say, oh, we want a black district, or we want an Asian district, or we just want a Republican district or a Democratic district. Stand on your principles and your values, and if they are good, people will vote for you.
I appreciate those points, and thank you very much, Bill. You know, part of the whole point of this discussion that I really wanted to focus on was what I describe as those feelings at the Thanksgiving table and why it is just so increasingly difficult for us to communicate with one another, especially with people who have different political ideologies. And in that context, I have seen these studies that came out recently talking about levels of partisanship in the United States. And granted, right now it feels like, boy, are we hyper-partisan. But the studies that I had seen were comparing the partisanship of 2016 to the partisanship of the 1870s, right after the Civil War, saying, does it feel like we're at an all-time high? Yeah, it feels that way because it probably is true. And what I wanted to ask of you folks, because again, I want this to come down to what you described, Lesley, that feeling in your gut, like why can't we talk about politics in a way that is not alienating to us, and where we can still be civil and be good neighbors and be good brothers and sisters and parents and fathers and sons and daughters. Why can't we do that without having our politics divide us? So my question then is, that trend of partisanship that is occurring in our country, why do you think it is so extreme today? Do you think it's the fundraising demands of our elected leaders? Is it a campaign finance type of issue? Is it because of mobilization efforts like Tea Party and Occupy? Those are parts of the problem. Is this like our educational system? We're just not focused enough on critical thinking, media literacy. What do you think it is? And where do you think it's going? Is this trend going in a place that's ugly to you, or is this trend going in a place that gives you some hope? And if I can, John, I'd like to start with you.
Well, I disagree with the notion that it's worse now than it ever was before. I mean, things got pretty heated during Watergate. Things got pretty heated when Bill Clinton was in office and he was impeached. Things got pretty heated any number of times in American history. So, you know, I don't think that this is atypical. I think a lot of it is tribalism. I think that you kind of circle the wagons when you see one of your own attacked. And when Republicans watch the news and they see Donald Trump savage day in and day out, they say, you know what? They're going after my guy. Fake news, turn it off. And when Democrats see, I know in the Democratic primary, the Bernie people and the Hillary people looked at the same coverage of that race and said, oh my God, look at how Bernie's being excluded from everything. The media's tilting everything in Hillary's favor. And I just think that's an innate human reaction that we all have.
the circle of wagons mentality. Interesting now. Shermichael, same question for you, and thank you. It is a very good point. About the partisanship and whether or not it's at record extremes or not, whether this is typical or atypical, it sure feels bad. And if you can speak to that point, Shermichael, about why do you think this trend towards extreme partisanship is happening, and do you see that trend line going in a good way or in a way that is concerning to you?
I mean, it's certainly concerning to me, but I don't think it's something new. I mean, as I stated before, we looked at throughout the course of our history as a nation, we have had a lot of issues, horrible issues, and we have been able to overcome all of those things. I mean, remember, there was one point in time members of Congress were having gun battles. Remember these things, the 1800s? People were attacking each other with canes. I mean, so there have been really horrific moments in time throughout the course of our history as a society, but I think, like anything, and we talked about this in the green room, I think life is a collection of moments in time. And it is the hope, it is the expectation that in each of those moments you take them, you reflect as a society, you grow and you become better. I think there are a lot of people, particularly the people who voted for the president, who had concerns. A lot of concerns with leaders who had expectations, and they felt that there was no one listening to them, no one speaking to them, no one speaking for them. And I think to the president's point, he did a great job of capturing that anger and that frustration. But now that you have it, what do you do with it? How do you translate that into something? And so I hope that as time goes on, and I don't think we'll see this, because if we look at what we see today, and it's an indication of what's to come, it doesn't look very good. But I have hope that as a country, as a society, we recognize that our commonalities are so much more bigger than our differences. And I've always believed there's differences that make us all unique. You know, when I meet someone who's a Democrat, if I meet someone who, I'm a Christian, who may be Jewish or maybe Islamic, whatever the faith may be, I'm interested, I'm intrigued. So because a person is a Muslim, should I look at them differently? Or because someone's a Democrat, should I look at them differently? Or because I grew up in the city and someone grew up in rural America, should their concerns about having a good, decent life not be important to me? I think the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves, what do I owe my fellow American? What do I owe my fellow human being? And we're not focusing on those things, because as we've talked about on this panel, we're so stuck into what is of interest to me, what validates me, versus trying to figure out what allows all of us to grow as a collective. It has to be about the collective, but again, I guess as I stated to you an hour ago, the hardest form of reflection is self-reflection, because it starts with the self. You have to be able to look in the mirror and realize, crap, maybe I do have some issues with some of the things I believe. Maybe there is something wrong with some of the positions that I have maintained. And if you're able to start with the self, then you come together as a collective, and then you're able to better move forward. But again, you're only able to control that self. You're only responsible for that self. And if you cannot reflect critically on your own internal issues, it's going to be pretty darn difficult for us to grow as a society.
Oh, thank you for that.
Well, I agree that this is not, in terms of polarization, the worst time ever, because I remember Watergate quite distinctly, that era. There were race riots around that time, there were anti-war demonstrations around that time, and the country was deeply divided between those who liked Nixon and those who hated Nixon. The big difference, I think, is the coarseness and the vitriol and the language we use. And I have to say that television is probably the culprit here. Television producers realized that conflict brought ratings, and people who yelled at each other would bring an audience. And so that's one of the reasons you always see on shows that we love to watch, I like it too, we have the disagreement and the volume goes up and the language gets coarser and coarser. I wanted to read to you something that I recently discovered. And this is by Samuel Huntington, the historian, who wrote a book in 1981 called American Politics, The Promise of Disharmony. And he said that every third generation demands huge political change, and therefore there is political upheaval. And here's the quote. He called it creedal passions. Creedal passions. He didn't say tribal, but it's the same sense of what you're saying. He says, in such moments, discontent is widespread. Authority and expertise are questioned. High polarization and constant protest. Hostility toward power, wealth, and inequality grows and becomes intense. And new forms of media emerge that become, they tend toward advocacy and adversarial journalism. He predicted in 1981 exactly what we are living through. It's stunning. It's stunning.
Yeah.
I know, when I read it, I said to write this down for all of you.
I appreciate the perspective. What do you think about that, Amy, about partisanship and whether it's at all-time highs or not, and whether it's a good trend or bad trend?
I mean, I do agree with the rest of the panel that we have seen similar moments, but I do think that social media has made it worse as well. I think it's the cable networks, it's social media. I hear from people all the time, every day, who think that, you know, they're right and something I wrote is garbage. And it's funny, yesterday, 2 people came up to me. I wanted to bring this up here because I thought it was apropos, but one woman, I was standing in line at a food truck to get some food, and she came up to me and said, "I'm not a fan."
And you said, "Thanks, Mom."
I actually, like, you know, part of me was like, oh, you know, you want to cry. But so I was, you know, we're here at a political convention, and even though I was starving, I stepped aside and I said, okay, tell me why you're not a fan. And she said, I haven't read your book, but, which is always, you know, what you want to hear. But I hate all the coverage of it. I think it's garbage. I hate how you presented Hillary Clinton. I love Hillary Clinton. She got such a bad rap in this election. You're to blame. You wrote all these negative things about her. And I was like, well, first of all, thank you for your opinion. I also wrote another book called HRC, which came before this book. A lot of people, the Wall Street Journal called it a sympathetic portrait of Hillary. I'm the same person who wrote that book, who co-wrote that book. And I said, I know you haven't read this book or that book, but this is me. This is who I am. And I thought, you know, and we talked it out. We talked for like 20 minutes about how, and it was actually probably the highlight of this entire convention for me, because it taught me that we can have a discussion about, you know, she told me she wasn't a fan, but I think she walked away kind of with an understanding of, you know, who I am and what I try to do. And I was thinking of this panel, and I was thinking, you know, if we can talk to each other, if we can be more civilized, even though she told me she wasn't a fan right away, if I can kind of let down my guard a little bit and find out, well, why aren't you a fan, even though I'm not a politician? I think that's a start, like having these conversations and being open to the fact. There was a study, another panelist on another panel I was on said that most of the people, and I forget the actual statistic, didn't know a person who voted for Hillary Clinton in their own families or crowd of friends, and the same for the other side. And I think that's so disheartening on some level, like that we can't really get to know one another and get to know what drives one another.
I know what you mean, and that's a great segue to my last point here. So we've got about 3 minutes, folks, so I'm going to do this in a speed round format. And what I wanted to mention is that, so I talked about Procon, the organization that is sponsoring today's discussion. We constantly present conflicting information in side-by-side format. When we asked our audience, how many of you changed your mind based on what you read at Procon? I crossed my fingers and thought, oh, if we get 5%, I will high-five my mom. We got to 36%, and I thought changing 36% of people's minds with information, you can't do that with a weapon, right? And I was very heartened by that. So what I wanted to ask for our speed round here is if you can tell I want to know for myself, but maybe you can help a lot of us here understand. When you are consuming information, how do you make sure you always get the counterpoint? And to quote another famous Angelino, how do you check yourself before you wreck yourself? Right? That's what you want to know. How do you get counterpoints? How do you triangulate the news? How do you consume information so we don't put ourselves in these echo chambers and filter bubbles?
I think you read everything. You read everything and you watch everything, and once you see what's out there, you can pretty much tell, or hope to tell, what the truth is that way. And frequently, I even start with reading publications or hate watching TV shows that I know are going to present the opposite side of what I believe, because I just want to know what the other side is thinking.
Thank you.
I would say, as you watch these shows, as you read things that may have different views and opinions than yourself, it reminds me of Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. He also wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And if you read the first chapter, he talks about humans, human conditioning, and how we relate to one another. And there's a quote where it says, imagine how you yourself would feel in a like situation. So if I'm a conservative, and I have a friend that's a Democrat, and they're angry and they're upset because a candidate of their choice did not win. They're angry and they're upset because there's no one, at least in their view, from their perspective, who's speaking truth to power about the issues that are of importance to them. I have to imagine, how would I feel if the shoes were on the other foot? And you have to listen and talk. That's the step.
Thank you. Thank you. Lesley.
It's a personal point. My mother was a very, very conservative Republican, and my father was a very liberal Democrat. And I grew up in that household. And whoever was speaking was right. And that's the way it was to me. If my mother made a point, I would say, oh, and then my father would argue, like, oh, and I think that I've kept some of that. I hope I've kept some of that. I've tried to keep this idea that I'm in the middle. And tell me. Everything goes back to your mother.
How about for you, Amie?
Repeat the question, because we've talked about so many
Yeah, so
ideas.
the question is about making sure you're constantly exposed to a contrary point of view, an opposing point, to check yourself before you wreck yourself. How do you do that?
I think it is. It's talking to both sides. It's hearing people out. It's that story I just told about listening. I think we do a lot of talking and not enough listening. And as a reporter, we're trained to listen. You know, I don't like these kinds of things because I feel like they're like the spotlight is on me, and I shy away from that. I tend to anyway. But I think more listening, less talking. I think that takes us at least another step in the right direction.
Well, folks, I appreciate your time very much. Let me just point out what I think is awesome. So we have a Trump supporter, someone who was fired by Trump, someone who did Trump's first interview as president, and someone who was covering Trump. A very diverse panel here.